Good morning, family. Hey, I wanted to just touch on this the war that just kicked off in Israel a little bit because I know it's got everybody kind of freaked out. Um, so, you know, Austin mentioned that he had heard about babies being beheaded. Now, war. I mean, it's war. It's horrible shit happens. Atrocities occur. I mean, it's freaking war. But we do have rules of war, and we have, standards of human decency and things. But look, here's the thing. Don't believe everything you hear. For one thing, I just did a quick search. I read 3 or 4 little articles, and all of them say that nothing can be confirmed about it. And then CNN said that I forget which news stations I went to, but even the Israeli government themselves can't confirm it. And so these kind of reports come in. There's a lot of horrible shit that happens in war, but one of the things that definitely happens during war is propaganda. You've got to get approval for your war. When you want to invade a country, not just your own citizens, but the world needs to kind of agree that you have that right to do that. If you're going to go in and blow shit up and kill a bunch of people, you have to prove that it's justified. It has to be retaliation for something horrific that's been done to you, or something like that. And so it will promote stories like this to get the court of public approval to help support their movement, their cause, their war. So let me back up a little. There's a lot of history here, things to consider. But first of all, let me point out a story. In Iraq, we went to war with Iraq. When I first got out of the army, there was a thing, a Desert Storm. We were going in because Saddam Hussein was. Kuwait was an independent nation that's right against Iraq there. It's right in their area. And so Saddam Hussein was invading Iraq, and they did this whole big story in order to get President Bush, George Bush first, Poppy, Skull and Bones member. He was in office when this Kuwait thing was happening, and we were going to go in there. We're going to liberate the people of Kuwait. Usually when we go to war, it's not to liberate anybody. It's not for humanitarian causes. It's always a manipulation of power. It's a way to make sure that we have a government in place in the strategic locations that we need a cooperative government in place. And Saddam Hussein is not being cooperative to our movements. We needed to oust him. And so as we're using this story about the Kuwaitis being oppressed and tortured or whatever to justify a war there. So Bush won, goes to war there, and he didn't really have approval from Congress or from NATO and the UN. We didn't have the support of the world to go in there. And so he had to just kind of did it. And one of the things that helped justify it for us, there was this girl that went on TV, and it was broadcast over and over and over again on every, CNN ran it round the clock, but it was all the different news programs promoted this statement that this girl made. And she was a Kuwaiti citizen talking about how the Iraqi soldiers had done all these horrible things and their family had to flee to safety, and she was talking about some of the things that she saw, and she was reporting this story about babies in incubators, and this became the headline for everything. She was talking about how these soldiers came in and they took all the incubators and they just left the babies on the floor to freeze and die. And she was in tears telling this horrible story, this thing that she witnessed. And this got promoted all over the place, and it turned out to all be a lie. There was no babies in incubators. In fact, the reports kept growing. But anyway, she was the daughter of some Saudi prince or some big important Saudi Arabian family. She was the daughter of them, and it was propaganda. It was to help promote this thing. And so this is part of war. 10 years later, with the other President Bush, after 9/11, we went into war with Iraq, and we finally finished the job then. So that was 10 years later, and they had nothing to do with 9/11, but we went to war with them anyway, and that really confused me at the time. Now that I understand the big picture, it all makes sense. But we went in there under the guise of that they had the ability to support terrorist activities and participate in terrorist activities because they had weapons of mass destruction, right? We're thinking that they can make nuclear weapons or atomic weapons, and so we had to go in there and stop them from doing that, and that was our thing. So we went in and we tore up all their shit and, took over, and we inspected everything, tons of inspectors in there, and there was no weapons of mass destruction. They didn't have the ability to do it. It was all bullshit. Again, it was a lie. And now that primarily came from Benjamin Netanyahu, which is the prime minister of Israel. Now, this guy is a propaganda king. This is what he does. He's trying to get us to go to war with Iran too, because it's another enemy of Israel. Now, this is probably gonna end Hamas. This will be, they're gonna make sure there is nothing left. They're gonna finish them off here. So this is probably the end of Palestine. Now, let me give you a little bit of history on that. The Jews were ousted. They were kicked out of Israel, or what they called the diaspora, where they dispersed the people around the world. It was after the Romans attacked Israel and destroyed the temple. This is the second time. 500 years before, the temple had been destroyed, and they rebuilt it. They had Solomon's temple. So the second temple period ended with the destruction of Solomon's temple in 70 AD. It was led by Titus. He was a Roman. After destroying your temple, he gets a book in the Bible. But anyway, so after they dispersed, they assimilated into different communities around the world. This is going to be really hard to keep this under 10 minutes. But we had a couple of primary groups that they called the Sephardic Jews, were the ones that ended up in Italy that were forced into Christianity later. And then there was all the Ashkenazi Jews, which is what most of the folks that are in Israel now are Ashkenazis. And so Ashkenazi means German, but it's European Jews. It's these Jews that assimilated into these other communities. And so part of the biblical prophecy to bring the Messiah, the return of the Messiah, is the Israelites, the Jews, have to be returned to the homeland that was promised to them, right? And so the promised land, Abraham's people need to return to their homeland. You need to get the Jews in there, and then they need to rebuild the temple. And this needs to happen before the return of the Messiah. And so back in 1947, there was a thing called the Balfour Declaration. Balfour was some dude that was part of the British Parliament. I don't know exactly who he was, but so the British government requested help from the Rothschilds to get this done. And so the Rothschilds came in and purchased the land that became Israel to reinstate the homeland. And it was just a small piece of that land, of the whole region there that was occupied by the Palestinians. It was just a small piece that was purchased by the Rothschilds to reestablish the homeland, the state of Israel. And so that happened in 47, but 48 is actually the year that it was established. That's when they celebrate the anniversaries. And so it's been 75 years that they have been back in the homeland. And now, this war happened to happen on an anniversary. Now, there's a period, what they call a jubilee. It's 50 years. Actually, it's 7 periods of 7 years, so it's 49 years. But the 50th year, they call it a jubilee. But it's a very important period of time. And this war that just kicked off was on the 50th anniversary of a previous war. They call the Yom Kippur Wars. Now, Yom Kippur is a very important holiday. So this, but there's a lot of things to try and get in here. It's possible if babies were beheaded, or crazy things are done to justify war. People will bomb their own citizens to blame it on somebody else, which they call a false flag, to justify a war. If I want to go to war with that guy and, people aren't in support of that, I'm going to fake it an incident, say he did something terrible to justify my retaliation to there. And so that happens very commonly in war. 9/11, that justified our military expansion into the Middle East. We needed that to happen, and it was talked about by a group called PNAC, Panel for a New American Century or something like that. It started during the Bush administration, but they said we need a new Pearl Harbor is what we need. We need a big incident to justify this so that we can expand this and get approval for military expenditures and blah, blah, blah. So different things are claimed to have happened. Not too long ago, there was claims of 11 minutes, of a gassing of people. It was actually perpetrated by the government of those people to claim that somebody else did. Now, these things happen as part of war. 9/11, for example. I don't know what you know about 9/11, but we were very aware that it was going to happen, and we're a part of it. And if you don't want to believe that, let me point you to something called Operation Northwoods. This was an operation that was planned for Kennedy, during the Kennedy era, in order to start a war with Cuba. We were going to crash a plane full of civilians and say that Cuba shot it down. And we were going to, this was all written down. It was a plan drafted up by the Joint Chiefs or whoever. We were going to blow up American cities, kill American citizens, so that these casualties would justify our retaliation and our invasion of Cuba, to start a war in Cuba. And this was called Operation Northwoods, and Kennedy refused to sign it. He was not on board with this plan. But I'm telling you, this is how wars are conducted. This is how shit happens. So don't believe all the crap that you hear. Yeah, there's going to be horrific stuff. There's going to be a lot of death and destruction. That is part of war. But this beheading of babies things is probably propaganda. I'm not saying that I don't know. I'm not there. Maybe it happened. Maybe it was something that was staged. Maybe a baby was killed in a bombing, and they decided to try and utilize that. Never let a good tragedy go to waste, is something politicians always say. And so maybe they staged a look of a beheading, but it was a baby that was killed in something else. And I don't know. I'm just saying, we don't know what happened. So don't get worked up about this stuff. War is, they call the locations that we conduct war in, they call it a theater. It's a theater of war because it's all a show. Don't believe what you see. Yes, there are truly horrific things going on, but not the way it's presented. Nothing that you see on the mainstream news, if it's pushed on TV over and over again, it has a purpose. It's probably not true. It's to guide public opinion, and it's propaganda.